Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, on the record in the matter of the people of the state of Michigan versus Michael Almazan in file number 23-02475 FY, appearance please.
Rich Castleman on behalf of the people.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. May it please the court, Deputy Chief Public Defender Steve Cornish on behalf of Michael Almazan, who's in the court and standing to my right.
How are you, Mr. Almazan? I'm sorry?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Today's the date and the time that's set for preliminary examination. Are we ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Any preliminary matters?
I would just notify the court that we do plan on proceeding via MCL 768.27C based on the officer's testimony. The victim is not present today. So I just want to give the court advance notice of that.
Okay. Any other preliminary matters for the people?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Cornish.
Nothing from the defense today.
Okay, you can call your first witness.
We would be calling Officer Matthew Meaton.
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're going to give is the truth and the whole truth under penalty of perjury.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. You can have a seat opposite. State your first and last name and spell both of them.
Officer Matthew Meaton, MATTHEWMEATON,
And proceed, counsel.
Officer Meaton, where are you currently employed?
Lansing Police Department.
Were you on duty on July 7th, or sorry, July 6th of 2023?
Yes, ma'am.
And on that date, did you have the occasion to come in contact with the Kara Cook?
Yes.
And how did you come in contact with her?
Me and another officer, Nathan Haas, who was my training officer at the time, were dispatched to 5815 Wise Road, which is our Department Operations Center, to which one we'll call it Kara. It's there for.
Right. And so was it your understanding, or what was your understanding of how she had arrived there?
Through contact with her and recollection, I believe she ended up going down the hole, which is the Delhi division for Ingham County. And then I think that's how she was told, based on some of the things I'm just inferring here, what she told them, is that you need to come and seem to talk with officers from our department.
And when she came to talk to you, can you tell me about her demeanor?
Yeah, I recall her having her hands over her face and like she was like sniffling.
You said it was hands over her face and what happened?
Sniffling. Just overall very emotional.
And in regards to, so did she tell you, I guess let's start with where was this interview taking place?
At our our interview conference room at 5815 Wise Road. We have like an area that our detectives sit at before they go in the interview room. So we just interviewed her in this conference area.
Did you observe any injuries on Miss Cook?
Not that I can recall, no, not.
Do you recall whether any injuries would have been notated in the report?
I believe Officer Haas notated some injuries, yeah.
And do you personally recall any injuries that you saw at the time?
Maybe other than a little redness, but I think it might have been behind one of her ears, but I'm not sure if we were sure if it's from this or if like it was just, you know.
Okay. And in regards to the interview, what was the interview regarding?
Well, to summarize it lightly, there's a lot. It was a 3-day total incident, which Kara advised Michael Robert Almazan held her against her will and strangled her and committed felonious assault against her, some other crime. So
I think we need a little more foundation for the 768 subject. So I object to your statement.
I believe that we need to get some foundation in terms of what she stated in terms of whether this was a domestic relationship and additional information on when this assault, when the date period was, in addition to the demeanor that I've already established to go through MCL 768.27C.
I assumed you were still laying the foundation.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll hold your objection.
Thank you.
And did she indicate her relationship with Mr. Almazan?
Yeah, it's a boyfriend, girlfriend dating relationship. It
Sharing
was
each other.
supposed to be at least what she said, and they lived together for, I believe she said only 2 months.
And did she indicate in relation to your interview on July 6th when this incident occurred? When the date range was?
Yeah, she said 3 days prior, so that'd be the 3rd of July. That's when this all started.
So it started on the 3rd of July and continued for the next 3 days.
Yes,
And in addition to that, after her statements made to you, was there any search done, or where did the incident occur that she stated?
1004 Dakin,
And what city is that in?
Lansing,
And is that in the county of Ingham?
yes,
And after her statements to you, was there any search done of that property?
yes, we responded to 1004 Dakin and gave consent search from her. We went to the residence.
And based on what she stated to you, did you find any types of weapons that she described or anything of that nature that you photographed?
Yeah, Officer Haas found evidence there. I photographed it, namely being a black-handled, silver-bladed kitchen knife, a carpet tool, silver in color, a handful of blankets that were upstairs from a bedroom, and then I believe the shorts she actually had on, blue black shorts. I took photographs of all those.
So what we'd like to deal with the objection at this point, I believe a proper foundation for the statements to come in.
Can you continue your objection this time?
For the record, I'm always continuing my objection to 768 stuff until the Supreme Court decides that it's nonsensical, stops allowing it.
I thought your objection was just to the foundation.
Well, I object in hearsay in general.
Okay,
for
sounds good.
this sort of testimony.
Okay, objection is noted.
Thank you.
Overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Can you tell me when the interview took place, did Ms. Cook have an easy time telling you about what happened?
No, I would say that my recruit officer, he was trying, but sometimes when people are just so sporadic with how they talk about things, typically in my experience with like real crimes that happen to someone that are violent, they typically misaccount things or account things out of order, or want to keep giving you things like certain details that when you're trying to go in chronological order as a police officer to help write in a report that makes sense, it's difficult. So I had to really take over in the interview myself and ensure that we were kind of going through it methodically as best we could. So it is difficult.
And did her demeanor have anything to do with that difficulty?
I would say, yeah. I think her demeanor, it was tough for her to recount things in order. So.
And so let's start from the July 3rd, when this incident started. Can you tell me what you stated happened to you on July 3rd?
Yeah, what happened to her on the 3rd was she was, I believe, home, and Michael, I think maybe through her phone, I'm not exactly sure on this part, but thought she was cheating. So she advised he ended up putting his hands, she gestured like hands around her neck, and she said he choked her. So as a police officer, we normally understand it strangled with the gesture. Said he pushed down on her neck. She said she didn't lose consciousness or anything like that. He stopped just prior to that point, but she did have restriction.
Did she state anything about whether she had soreness to her neck or any other injuries?
Yeah, she did. She did say her neck was sore. I remember seeing that on the camera.
And so did she state where Mr. Almazan was during this incident? Like, what was their positioning?
Yeah, from what I was able to gather and what she was able to tell me is that he was over top of
And did she indicate to you where this incident occurred?
all I recall is the house may have been the room. I'm not exactly sure.
And in regards to, so after that strangulation, what happened next in this case?
Yeah, so at the time when I was interviewing her, she said that was a third. I'm like, okay. And then she started getting details about later on. And I was hearing this, and after 7 years of being here, I'm like, okay, well, you don't just go to bed after something like that happens. So I'm like, did anything of a sexual nature happen? And then said, well, yeah, we ended up having intercourse. And she gave details about how that unfolded after he was strangled by him. She said that he put his penis in her vagina, protected, and she said that Michael told her that it would help her anxiety. She just did it.
And did she tell you anything about whether she felt willing to leave or anything of that nature or fear at that point?
Not that I can really readily recall.
Do you recall reviewing your body camera in this in this incident? And do you also recall reviewing the statements that were typed up by your training officer regarding this incident?
Yeah,
This incident?
yeah.
And is that an accurate depiction of what you reviewed on your body camera?
Yeah, there are small things here or there that maybe he heard that I didn't, but for the most part, he did a great report.
If I showed you your report, would that help refresh your memory on
Yeah.
that fact, whether there was fear or any other force that was done?
Yeah.
May I approach the witness with the report?
You may.
I would just ask that you refresh your memory with the report and then let me know when your memory is refreshed and I can re-ask the question. Is your memory refreshed?
Yeah,
Okay, can you tell me whether there was any fear or any other force that was used? at
it
that
looks
point?
like Officer Haas noted that she was in fear of being hurt or killed.
And do you recall that being stated by Ms. Cook?
I did.
Okay, in regards to.
I would
so-
object
Yeah.
then, Your Honor, to that entire last thing of questioning. He doesn't recall that statement having been said. The fear of being hurt or killed should be stricken.
Because that was another officer. That was stricken.
So did Ms. Cook indicate when in relation to the strangulation, the intercourse had happened?
So it was, like I said, a very difficult interview, but I mean, that was us piecing things together, but she didn't advise of like immediately after or several hours after. It was just, I understood it to be after that assault occurred, but specifically.
And did Ms. Cook, do you recall her stating anything about the reason as to why she engaged in sexual intercourse at that point?
All I recall was her saying that he told her to help her anxiety and if she just did it.
And after that, did Ms. Cook tell you anything about whether she had the ability to leave the home at that point?
She did say at some point during this entire 3 days, based on my own personal observations, she said that certain doors were screwed shut. So she was unable to go readily about the house or even exit. I did observe when I was there screws and doors, and I was pretty taken back. I've never seen anything like that before as an officer. So.
And was there anything that Ms. Cook stated to you about about her ability to go into different areas of the home at that time and whether Mr. Almazan was controlling that?
Yeah, like I said, that there was a certain part later on in her last part of the statement where he literally undrilled the door to let her into the house.
You would do what?
Like unscrewed the door, the front door of the house. It was later on in her statement, but you said that Michael undrilled the door so she could walk out.
Let me just, the issue is that I can't hear over these people out there. Can you have them move? Thank you. Okay. Back to what you were saying about did the door to let her out?
Yeah, so it would be later on, it would be on the 6th. I recall her saying to me that she wanted to go to work. I think it was to not raise any other coworkers' suspicions of what had happened or taken place. So Michael literally undid the front door to the house so she could go to work.
Okay.
So was she, in regards to the being unable to leave the home, was that during the entirety of the 3 days?
That we didn't get specifically from her. But we did see this stuff there. Again, her interview was difficult.
And the next day,
Give me just a moment. Speak louder so that I can hear you versus them, if possible.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
okay, so on the next day, on July 4th, what did Miss Cook say had happened to you?
There's a lot, so let me just think for a minute and make sure I have things correct. Okay, so from what I remember on the 4th, she contacted a coworker of Michael's named Gary. Gary showed up in a silver truck. She went outside to go see Gary. Michael, when she was on the porch area, shoves her off the porch and grabs her by the hair and he hit her. She wasn't really entirely sure, you know. And then she ended up stopping because she ran to a neighbor's house. And this part of her statement was very confusing to me because then she ended up down in Holt at either her mom's house, I think it was her mom's house. But then Michael, either through someone else or from her own recollection, said that he was coming to kill her. But then she said she was going to pick him up, and they ended up going back home to their house on day again after going down the hole and all this other stuff.
And so when Miss Cook did end up escaping on July 4th.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah,
So she reached out to this neighbor, and when the neighbor showed up to the home.
Nope, the neighbor, she reached out to a guy named Gary. Gary is a coworker that I
I
understood as
can't hear
Michael's.
anything you say. I'm so
Okay,
sorry.
that's okay.
All I heard is someone hasn't had a bath in 2 weeks and something about a effing gun. That's what I heard. He should be remanded. Well, he's disturbing the entire court.
Do you want me to leave my head more to the mic? Maybe
Well, I don't
Well, the thing is that I think that you have a lower voice anyways,
Okay.
which is why I had him turn the fan off. And then this does definitely stop some of it. Exactly, all that sound from the other.
I'll try and kick it up a whole nother
Okay,
notch.
thank
okay?
you.
Um,
Last thing I heard was she was in Holt. She ended up in Holt and maybe a family member's house.
Okay, yeah, so Kara ended up in Holt. Once she got to Holt, either through someone else telling her or through her own knowledge of hearing him on the phone, said that he was gonna come kill her. She said that after this, she picked him up at a Wendy's in South, which we understood to be in South Lansing. And then she took Michael home later that night on the 4th. So that was the full account. She did get away. It was while Gary showed up initially. Gary is again Michael's coworker, he was driving a silver truck. That's when she was assaulted initially. She ran to a neighbor's house who wasn't home, but then somehow ends up going to Holt. And then comes back by picking Michael up and goes back to the house in Dakin later that day.
Did she,
I was just gonna say, did she say where she picked him up from?
Wendy's in South Lansing, I think is what we understood.
Oh,
it to be.
this was on the 4th, correct?
Correct, yep.
do you recall whether Michael's mother was involved at all in picking her up?
That sounds correct. Yeah, that does sound correct.
Do you recall her talking about getting help from Michael's mother on that date?
Yeah, that would be, I believe, in the police report. Yes, that does sound right.
And in regards to, was there any type of phone call between Miss Cook and Mr. Almazan on that date in regards to the reference to kill?
I believe that's when she heard him on the phone. But if, again, when we were interviewing her, this is kind of what we're understanding it to be. It's tough to get specifically how, that's how we understood it.
And from the date range of the 7/3 to 7/6, from July 3rd to July 6th, it sounds like, am I correct that she came directly from escaping this situation to law enforcement?
Yeah, so on the 6th, she went down a hole in McDonald's down there. And then after that was law enforcement contact. And then obviously us.
Okay, so in regards to, so after Miss Cook picked up Mr. Almazan from the Wendy's, what happened next?
Yeah, I remember her saying that she took him back home. And I believe some other things happened that night, and I'd have to refresh my memory to count those.
Right, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Just let me know when your memories refresh about what happened once they got back to the house. So what happened, is your memory refreshed from that police report?
Yes,
And what happened when she got back
yes.
to?
She advised of another assault. After they got back, Michael put a knife against her neck and her rib cage. I remember her gesturing towards her rib cage with that. That was the knife based on what she was explaining.
Okay, did she state where in the house this took place?
I believe Nate broke the living room, but I heard her say that on the body cam. I said, yeah.
Okay. And did Miss Cook state anything about what she was feeling when she was threatened with, when the knife was placed against her neck or throat?
Nothing that I could recall, no.
And what was there any type of argument that surrounded that knife being pulled?
Nothing that I could recall from watching my body camera or reading that, but it looks like Nate put something else.
And then on the next date, what happened on that next date, July 5th?
Sorry, may I review the report again?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
Just let me know when your memory is refreshed
Thank
about the
you.
next date. Is your memory refreshed on what happened on July 5th?
Yes, it is.
Right, what happened on that?
So on the 5th, she advised at some point during the day, I believe her grandparents were getting concerned about her and people were like knocking at the door. Now, the details of this are kind of all over the place, but from what I was able to piece together, Michael had a carpet tool. So it's what he did for a job. He did carpeting. or flooring installation, and this carport tool is like a silver thing, and I remember it being quite big.
Okay, and then you're gesturing in front of you right now.
Yeah.
How long would you say that carpet tool is?
18 to 24 inches.
And what is that? What material is that carpet tool?
It's metal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what did she say happened with that carpet tool?
Yeah, she said that Michael held it up and threatened to bash her head in with it.
And what happened next after that?
Okay, so throughout the day, my understanding was that there are obviously these screws and doors and stuff in play. Again, she didn't specify exactly when, but seeing these things on scene and everything else. Like, okay, so she's there, that happened. Michael, she said, took like, I think either two sharp objects, maybe a knife, maybe a box cutter or something along those lines, and held them in the hands because of knocking at different times, thought it may have been law enforcement. He made threats to, obviously be violent towards, I believe, law enforcement and things. But then at some point she became so tired, she went upstairs, was my understanding, of their bedroom, and that'd be in it's like a Cape Cod house, it'd be the upstairs bedroom there. I could go up the stairs and be towards the east, our bedroom. She said like her eyes were like going back into her head because she was so tired and was gonna pass out. And Michael was like rubbing her chest to get her to be awake. And I think because she was so tired and everything, that was my account of the death. I could be missing something.
Did Miss state why she was so tired?
I think she wasn't able to shower. She told me that she wasn't able to shower. I remember watching that on the camera footage.
And why was she not able to shower?
That maybe because he didn't let her, but I'm not exactly sure. She said she wasn't able to shower. But just understanding things in the totality, it just sounds like the freedom to move about the house or the screws in the doors might have played a role in some of that.
And what about her ability to sleep during that time? Was that restricted in any manner?
Well, I would say Michael rubbing her chest, waking her up, probably stopped her from sleeping.
Was there any statements that Ms. Cook made about being Mr. Almadon not letting her sleep during those days?
Nothing that I can specifically recall.
And did Ms. Cook state anything about any sexual contact that happened on the 5th?
Yes, so what I recall from there was that she did have intercourse again with them that particular night.
And did she state anything to you about her willingness to engage in sexual contact with Mr. Almadon?
To refresh my memory, I feel like,
May I approach with the report? Your Honor?
Yes.
We know when your memory is refreshed.
thank you.
Is your memory refreshed about that?
Yes.
Can you tell me whether she stated anything about her willingness, and from your recollection of body cam as well, her willingness to engage in sexual contact at that point?
Well, her recollection was that she just had intercourse, but me taking into account of what happened, like assaults and not being able to leave a home and things.
And I can't ask
I
for
was
a
gonna
personal
object.
conclusion.
Right.
I
Yeah.
was just gonna
Yeah.
object. I
Yes.
think that's coming to a conclusion,
Yes.
which is a law thing with a
But
witness thing.
yeah, okay, so no, but again, my understanding, but it sounds like that it is. She did say they had intercourse. He wasn't wearing a condom and he ejaculated inside it.
Okay. And going back to the intercourse that happened on July 4th as well, what parts of Mr. Almadon's body touched what parts of Ms. Cook?
On the 3rd, yes. So on the
Yeah.
3rd, it was the 3rd, nothing on the 4th, and on the 5th.
Yeah.
Same thing, it was penis, vagina.
And that was also what happened on the 5th.
Yes, 3rd.
And on the 6th, can you tell me what occurred on that day?
Okay, so my understanding was from Kara that she had to go to work and she didn't want, obviously, everything exploding out of control more than it already had. So Michael undrilled the front door to the house, and she was able to get out, and I think she got down to the McDonald's and pull, and she was able to and get in contact with police. I remember her also mentioning him threatening her with a box cutter on the 6th before she left. I think that's what she was saying to me.
Okay, and the threats with the box cutter, how did he threaten her with that box cutter?
Put it to her neck.
Did he assault her in any other way when he was threatening her with a box cutter?
Nothing that I could specifically recall. I think Nate noted something different. In that.
Okay. And once so did Ms. Cook state whether Mr. Almazan left before her or whether she left before Mr. Almazan?
That detail wasn't super clear to me, but I think he left because he might have had to go to work too. Obviously, that day we returned back to the residence. He was not there. And we did afterwards, after talking with her, we did try to go to his work environment to find him, and he wasn't there also, definitely not told.
And as part of the investigation, do you know whether other witnesses were interviewed?
So Sarah's daughters were interviewed by Matthew Carlson. He's a police officer with us. I believe Officer Moshi made contact with the guy of Gary, and they have talked to him.
And in regards to the screws that you observed in the residence, can you tell me where those were in the residence? What doors? From your recollection.
Not specifically every door, but I do remember the front door. I remember one on the side door, I believe back by the kitchen, or is it either back there or the back entry, but there was a handful of doors that had and I did take photos. I would be able to, if I were able to see photos, I'd be able to recount what kind of where they're at. I remember screws and doors.
And you said before that you had never seen anything like that before. What was so different about what you saw there based on your training or experience?
Well, I've never had a victim statement where someone was like held against their will with screws and doors. It just kind of, it was quite shocking to hear that.
Okay. And was Ms. Cook upset, crying, or hysterical at any point during the statement to you?
Like I said, she was physically emotional, had her hands over her face and was sniffling when I initially made contact with her. And her statement was just, cannot stress this enough, quite difficult to render.
And after, did she express any fear of Mr. Almazan in making this report?
She told me she did not even want to go back to the house. She didn't want to go inside there. She offered the key at one point. She did say she wanted to get mail out of the mailbox, which I think was a bridge card, but she didn't want to go in the house. What she told me initially.
Did she express any fear about what Mr. Almazan would do based on her reporting this?
Nothing like directly stated as to him that I could recall, but just I sense based on what she's telling me and all these things that happened to her general fear of what happened in general.
And did Ms. Cook give you and Officer House information about who Mr. Almazan is in order to try to find him?
Yeah, about his identity. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. She gave us Michael Robert Almazan. I think she said August 28th of 1980 something. And Officer Carlson, I believe, came in and showed a photo of Michael Robert Almazan, age 26 of 87, and showed that SOS photo to her, and she was able to say, yeah, that's him. That was in Officer Carlson's report.
Okay, but you yourself, were you able to take the information obtained by Ms. Cook and see if you could confirm Mr. Almazan's identity?
So I took Michael Robert Almazan with his actual date of birth, and yes, I confirmed the photo of him. That's how Officer Carlson did it. So that's photo.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have any prior contacts with Mr. and don't tell me about any type of, but have you ever seen Mr. Almazan before?
I believe it was me and Officer Ella Brown and Officer Bailey Uberoth
And we don't need to talk about what that
Yeah,
contact
yeah,
was about.
yes, but yes, I believe it.
Okay, and do you see Mr. Almazan in the courtroom today?
I do.
And can you tell us where he's sitting and what he's wearing?
He's seated to my left of the defense attorney, and he's wearing a blue suit with silver buttons.
May the record reflect the witness identified the defendant.
What color are your buttons? With some buttons. Any objections, identification?
You said Officer Carlson? I somebody, I have one here, very, very.
Oh, yes.
You said Officer Carlson showed the photo?
Yes.
Were you there when he showed the photo? Or she-
Yeah, yeah, it was in the room.
So you were standing there and the photo was on the screen?
Yeah, from what I was able to see from my body camera is that he came in and showed the photo, but Officer Carlson, I saw right in his police report that he identified him. Michael Almazan showed a SOS photo, and that's how we identified him, so that's how. There.
No objection. Thank you.
Identification is done.
And in regards to your investigation, were you ever able to make personal contact with Mr. Almazan on that date on July 6th?
No, I was not.
Okay. And was Ms. Cook offered a stain examination, like a for the sexual assault that occurred?
Yes,
during this
multiple
incident?
times, yeah.
And what did she state about that decision to not go forward with the stain examination?
She just chose not to. I remember her refusing to do that.
And did Ms. Cook describe to you any injuries that occurred during those 3 days?
Maybe more than Officer Nathan Haas, not me.
Okay. And I don't have any further questions at this time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, sir.
I guess I just want to start with, it was the 4th of July that Gary came over to the house. Is that correct, or was it the 3rd?
It would have been 4.
And at that time, the complainant went outside and was around Gary, and in fact, went to the neighbors. Is that all accurate?
Sounds correct, yes.
And then on the 5th of July, her grandparents came over to the house and came into the house. Her grandparents came over to the house. Correct?
On the 5th,
Yes, sir.
I wasn't exactly clear on how she ended up down, but I use my police report to be able to tell you, certainly.
Well,
Or the-
rather than doing that,
Yeah.
let me see if I can ask the question a little bit different. The house we're talking about is the one on Dakin, is that correct?
Yeah, yes,
Here in Lansing.
correct.
And she indicated at some time during this 3-day period, her grandparents came to the house on Dakin.
Yeah, I think she said on the 5th, she thought maybe her grandparents came to the house to check on her. One of the days they came to check on her.
And they came into the house to talk to her.
I'm
Without what was being said, but they came into the house to see her and talk.
I'm not clear on that. I think she made it sound like they may have been there trying to knock at the house, but I wasn't told whether they came in or not.
And then on the 6th, when it was time for her to go to work, the complainant left Miss Cook, went to work. Or left the house to go to work.
Yeah, she left the house.
Whether she went to work or not is a different story, but she definitely left the house that day as well.
Yeah, yes.
So she was able to come and go from the house, isn't that true?
In a certain fashion, yes. Yeah, after he took us through out of the door.
And let's talk about the 3rd again here. They had an argument that escalated into a physical fight, is that correct, according to your testimony?
She got strangled after he accused her of cheating.
And at some point later that day, and you're not even sure how long after that, the two had sexual intercourse.
Yes, that's correct.
In fact, she said he was upset to calm him down. She let him have sex with her.
Help her with her anxiety. She let him have sex with her, is how she phrased it.
Thank you. To be clear, these two are boyfriend and girlfriend.
Yes,
They're-
they're domestic relationship.
They're living together.
Yes.
They're sexually active.
I guess based on what I was told from that, sounds like there's sexual activity.
And then again, we talk about, I believe you said it was the 6th, He woke her up, you said, correct? He was rubbing her chest.
That would have been on the fifth.
I'm sorry, thank you. So on the 5th, he was rubbing her chest when she fell asleep.
She said her eyes were rolling back into her head because she was exhausted and was trying to, I think, revive her, rub her chest.
In fact, the accused woke her by rubbing her chest.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Didn't say roping her or anything like that. Rubbing her chest could just as easily be some sort of a sexual grope as it could be rubbing somebody on the chest to wake them up if they were sleeping. Isn't that true?
I understood that to be like, vigorous, yeah, trying to.
So in a non-sexual manner of trying, you for the record, you indicated your knuckles were like pushing across.
Yeah, like a sternum rub. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would agree with that.
All right. Thank you. And at some point later, they again had sex.
Yes.
He didn't force her to have sex. She let him. Isn't that her statement? She never
Yeah.
said he forced me to have sex.
Yeah, she said she let him.
Thank you. Oh. Said she was sniffling a lot during the interview.
Initially, yeah.
At that point in time, I guess it's only a couple months ago. How long had you been on the job as a police officer?
Me?
Yes, sir.
Let's see, back to July, would have been 6 years and some change.
So a while. Have you ever come across anybody else when interviewing them that sniffles a lot during an interview?
That's emotional, sure. After a traumatic crime, yeah. Yeah, or sometimes even the lightest of things. But yeah, people do cry when we talk to them.
Well, I mean, you said sniffling, not crying. Was she crying as well? Were there tears coming out or just the
I wasn't
sniffling?
able to see from the body cam footage, but I mean, the sniffling, the hands over the face, I would interpret.
Well, let me ask you this, because this is very important. You testified a whole lot about what you saw on your body cam today, right? And about what you read in the police report, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that a yes?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
sure is.
You remember a lot of the stuff you're testifying to, or are you just remembering what you looked at this
I
morning?
remember generalities about it, but when I go to testify, I have to make sure that I know as specifically as possible the truth. So I go through and watch my body on camera on things that are of this magnitude. I just did for circuit court the other week, you know. Sometimes over time, details become muddled and you might not remember things or how they transpire. And being that I'm the crew that wrote a lot of this, I had to really rely on my body on camera, which records real time and is on me at all times when I work. Well, I mean, mostly. So.
I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
and I appreciate the fact that you took the time to refresh your memory this morning,
Yeah,
which sounds like what you were just saying.
yeah.
But did that refresh your memory, or are you testifying from what you saw on your body?
I would say it refreshed my memory, yeah, on certain things and other things I watched and I had to see what was said again, yeah. I'm human, I can't remember everything.
So for the purposes of today's testimony, what parts today that you're testifying to are that you actually actively remember, and what parts are you just, I don't want to use the word, I guess, spouting back what you saw on the camera today?
That's a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff.
How about this one?
Yeah,
What parts do you actually remember?
I remember her being at 10:04 Dakin, her advising that he was assaulted. I remember the carpet like stretcher thing. I remember.
I would object to this question. I don't think it's necessarily proper form to have him go back through all of his testimony. And I mean, I asked clearly, does this refresh your recollection? He refreshed his memory with his body cam this morning, as police officers usually do with any call. Even 2 months prior, I think it's normal with the amount of calls that Officer Meaton handles to refresh his memory. I don't think we should go through specifically every other fact that he's already testified to. He's testifying to his personal knowledge and memory, that's been clear. And he's said when it's not his memory. So
Do you want to respond to the objection?
Absolutely, Your Honor. First off, it's cross. I can do whatever I want as far as refreshing or asking every single question she just asked if I want to. I don't want to do that. Secondly, it is important whether or not he is actually remembering the incidents. which is why we refresh people, or if he's simply spouting back what he watched on his camera this morning with no independent recollection. That's all I'm trying to get to the bottom of. What's independent recollection, and what is him simply repeating what he just watched without any memory of it at all. So I'm trying to figure out what he remembers and what he's just repeating back.
I think it's important to know what portions he has an independent recollection of versus what he refreshed his recollection from. I think as it relates to the questions that he was asked on direct, it's clear which areas he had to be refreshed on there. But I think you're gathering or seeking to gather when he refreshed his recollection using his body cam prior to. Is that what you're, prior to today's date? Is that what you're asking?
I'm trying to make sure that he actually has independent memory of this.
And not that he
was
just studied
refreshed.
his body cam?
And not that he just studied his body cam for the quiz, and it's now just repeating what he just watched without memory at all.
Okay, but to the extent that he could go back over everything he said and tell you what portions he were independently recollect, that might be a bit cumbersome.
I'll ask him more specific.
Thank you.
Do you specifically remember having refreshed yourself and watched the videos, but now actually remember? Let me ask this.
Yes, I remember quite a majority of this as I lived with it and I listened to things. I'm obviously not perfect and we have to recall things and watch things, and normally I have a police report, but when I'm training someone, they do tend to write a majority of the report to teach them the right things, so.
Your Honor, I don't think I have anything else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you redirect?
Yes. Was there anything that in regards to Ms. Cook's demeanor, did Ms. Cook apologize for anything in regards to her condition when she arrived at the interview?
Nothing that I can specifically recall right now.
Do you recall any statements about her ability to, I guess her condition when she showed up at the police station for the interview?
Ask the answer, Your Honor.
Well, I can ask as well whether the report would refresh her memory in regards to whether she apologized or not.
I didn't hear that part, sorry.
He said he didn't, he said he didn't remember, but you're asking him if the report will refresh his recollection?
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, so I think to what you're asking, just for sake of truth and honesty
Yes.
here, these are things that Nate may have wrote, again. His observations.
You don't personally recall that. Okay. And in regards to, you were talking about the sniffling and the demeanor, do you see, in regards to that demeanor from Miss Cook, from your training and experience, was that similar to other victims of recent trauma that you've seen?
Yeah, I would say anyone that we go to, something that may have just happened, the emotional shock from something really sets in when they're talking to a law enforcement officer. It normally comes out, sniffling, crying, so overall frustration with what happened, those kinds of things.
Okay, I don't have any further questions for this witness.
Witness be excused.
Yes, Your Honor.
No objection.
Thank you, officer.
Thank you.
And you can call your next witness.
We don't have any further witnesses, Your Honor.
Is the defense calling witnesses today?
No, Your Honor.
Did you see the argument?
Yes, Your Honor. So in regards, I would be arguing for binder over at this moment. I do think that this is just a probable cause standard. I do think the testimony has been properly presented through MCL 768.27C through the victim's testimony or victim statements to the officer. This incident was reported right after Ms. Cook was able to actually escape the home at that time. I would note that in regards to count 1, criminal sexual conduct in the first degree, I believe that there are multiple variables that are in play here. That is the criminal sexual conduct that occurred on July 3rd. That occurred after a strangulation occurred to the victim. And she did state that The defendant had convinced her to engage in sexual contact, a penis to genital opening, stated it would help with her anxiety. That was after he had already strangled her. She had a sore neck. He was over top of her. She had restrictions to breathing at that point. In addition, I believe that the defendant during this time so I would be withdrawing the second element in regards to the armed with a weapon or any article used to fashion. I don't believe that element it took place, but I do believe there was force and coercion in this incident, and the victim sustained personal injury, namely mental anguish, which was clear from her statement to the police officers. In addition, I believe that the officer did testify to the unlawful imprisonment that occurred during July 3rd, where the victim was not able to leave the residence because the doors were screwed and she was unable to leave at that point. The victim did state during that day that the defendant had screws into the doors to prevent her from leaving, and she had restricted access throughout the house. And in order to leave, the doors would have to be unscrewed by the defendant. So I do believe that those two multiple variables have been proven by a probable cause standard, that there was personal injury and force or coercion. He had to convince her to engage in the sexual activity, and more importantly, a strangulation had just occurred before this incident on that same date. It's not clear exactly when the strangulation occurred, whether it was within hours or right before the incident, due to the level of trauma to the victim at the point of her actual interview with the police. But I do believe that there was clearly force or coercion in this manner, and that there was circumstances of the felony of unlawful imprisonment during that date of July 3rd. In the alternative to that count, I would be asking for criminal sexual conduct in the third degree under the personal injury, force or coercion theory. Here, I apologize. Or just the force or coercion theory. I would be asking in the alternative to that count, if the court does not find probable cause for criminal sexual conduct in the first degree, that it be bound over as criminal sexual conduct in the third degree, force or coercion, which does not require personal injury, under MCL 750.520D1B. On count 2, that occurred on July 5th of 2023. On that incident, the officer testified that the victim had fallen asleep because she was so exhausted at that point. And at that point, the defendant put his penis inside her vagina and ejaculated inside of her. After that point, she was finally able to escape the next date from the residence. But before, the same day before that the sexual assault that took place, the defendant threatened the victim with a box cutter, threatened the victim with a metal carpet tool, told her that he would kill her, would not let her leave the home. I think it's clear that there was unlawful imprisonment the entire date of July 5th. She was unable to leave the home. There was someone knocking. Her grandparents came to check on her because they were concerned. They were not let in the home from the statements of Ms. Cook. And he was also stating that he thought that Mr. Almazan was stating to Ms. Cook and her children that the police were there, and that the defendant was scared of the police making contact. So I believe that was force or coercion leading to personal injury, as well as during the commission of the felony of unlawful imprisonment, and that the defendant at that time was armed with multiple dangerous weapons, not only the carpet tool, but as well the box cutter at that point. In addition, I would also ask for the alternative of CSC third. If the court does not find criminal sexual conduct in the first degree in regards to the personal injury element, I would ask for criminal sexual conduct in the third degree with force or coercion under MCL 750.520D, parentheses 1, parentheses B. On count 3, the unlawful imprisonment, I believe it's clear that on July 3rd, in addition to more clearly on July 5th, the defendant would not allow the victim to leave into the July 6th date. And I would just be highlighting July 5th to July 6th. I know that this complaint has a date range. In regards to July 5th, the defendant did not allow the victim to leave the home. There were multiple people checking up on her. He was threatening to kill her at that point. So they were not able to get she was not able to get contact at that point. She was only allowed to leave the home when the defendant took the screws at the front door so that she could leave at that point. So I believe that she was unable to leave. The corroboration from the officer as well, that there were screws within the home, that he had never seen anything like that before, that there were actual physical reasons as to why the victim could not leave at that point. The defendant was armed with a dangerous weapon. He was secretly confining and knowingly restraining Miss Cook. He did not allow her to answer the door, or it sounds like multiple people. And he also knowingly restrained Miss Cook to facilitate the commission of the criminal sexual conduct that occurred later that night. She was only allowed to leave when he took the screws out of the front door. There were also the strangulation that occurred that was clearly testified to that occurred on July 3rd, that Miss Cook was strangled by the defendant, that she had obstruction of breathing at that time. In regards to counts 5, 6, and 7, count 5, the victim was threatened with a knife by the defendant he was threatened with a knife by the defendant on July 4th. She only came back in contact with him because he threatened to kill her. At that point, she did go pick up the defendant. And he accused her of cheating. It's a common pattern. He took a knife and placed it against her neck, her throat, and the left side of her rib cage, and clearly showed the officers where that knife was placed against her, which is a felonious assault. The sixth count is the assault with the box cutter that occurred on July 5th, where the defendant assaulted the victim with the box cutter in the hand, when there was a knocks at the door. In addition, the defendant also assaulted the victim with a carpet tool, threatened to kill her with it. That was clearly a dangerous weapon. It was, I believe, testified 12 to 18 inches long. It was a metal tool. I think that it's clear that the unlawful imprisonment was occurring definitely during the dates of July 5th and July 6th. The defendant used multiple dangerous weapons to prevent the victim from getting the help that was actually showing up to the home to try to help her. And in addition, I do believe that the children in the home technically were victims under this as well, but those threats were clearly directed towards Miss Cook herself. So I believe that all three of those alternative elements for unlawful imprisonment were met by this testimony by probable cause standard, and I would ask for bind over as stated.
Mr. Branch.
Briefly, Your Honor, thank you.
I guess I want to start with count 3. And primarily point out, I guess, Your Honor, the fact that Ms. Cook's not here today. The testimony we got from the officer was the statements she made were all over the place. And he kind of piecemealed everything together to come up with his conclusions in linear order of events, which gives me pause when it comes towards trustworthiness. That having been said, the testimony was that, from my notes, and the court can obviously correct me or go on its own notes, but from my notes was that she left on the 3rd, she left on the 4th when Gary came over. She went outside, went over to the neighbors, went to her mom's, picked up my client from someplace and came back home with him. On the 5th, her grandparents came over. I said, did they come in the house? He says, I don't remember what she said. I want to say maybe they didn't, but I don't remember. Not that they were forced to stay outside, but that they had come over to the house and he didn't recall whether they came in and talked to people or not. And he wasn't certain as to what she had said. I specifically asked him that on the cross. And then again, she also then left again the next day. I'm not contesting whether or not this officer saw screws in the door or the doors were screwed shut. It's entirely possible that someone could screw their doors shut and do that and it not be unlawful imprisonment, Your Honor. I would like to have heard her say that he would not let her leave, that he restrained her and would not allow her out of the house. Whether she had to say, hey, I'm going to leave to go to work and you take the screws out of the door is not the same as, why won't you let me leave? I'm being restrained against my will. And I don't think that they've met that burden, especially without her coming in to say that she felt like she couldn't go. Regarding counts 1 and 2, I specifically also asked, was there any force, threats, coercion, something to force her or coerce her to do it? And he said she never said that. She said she had sex with him. He said, hey, you're kind of anxious. I think you might calm down if we have sex. But he wasn't even certain when that occurred other than the date. So they had a fight, allegedly, and there was some strangulation that allegedly occurred. And then at some point later that day, they then later had sex. Not during the fight, not while that's going on. And she never mentioned that there's any forced threats occurrence. She just let him have sex. They had sex. These are a couple who are living together. And while we don't have any testimony because she didn't testify here today, I believe he said he believed that they were having ongoing sexual relationships based upon all over the place statements. When it comes back down now again to the second offense, or count 2, simply said that he woke her up. I think the prosecutor kind of misconstrued the testimony just a little teeny bit, that he woke her up and then later they had sex after she was awake. Not that she was unconscious and he had sex with her, but he woke her up by rubbing his knuckles across her chest in a non-sexual way to kind of like, here, you know, wake up. And then at some point they had sex. Again, no force, no threats, no coercion. And the time immediately after that she asked to leave the house, she went, go to work. This isn't somebody who's being restrained and not allowed to leave. This is somebody who maybe they're in a house that doesn't have a lock on the door. I don't know. Maybe they have to screw the door shut because they're afraid somebody's going to break into the house. We don't know. It's all speculation as to why they screwed the door. She's not here to tell us. All I know is that we have 3 days with 3 examples of her leaving to go do stuff, and allegations of sexual assault when there was no force, no threats, no coercion for the sex. It is entirely possible for a person to have a GBH, assault by strangulation, and then later on have makeup sex or have sexual intercourse in a consensual manner. And without any evidence to the contrary here today, Your Honor, I don't think this court could bind this over on counts 1, 2, and I would argue count 3 shouldn't be bound over. I'll leave the rest to your discretion. Thank you, Your Honor.
May I respond, Your Honor? So I would just state that there is a specific jury instruction that states that resistance is not needed, and the court can take in the totality of the circumstances when it comes to what was happening to Ms. Cook. I'd like to correct Mr. Cornish's statements. Ms. Cook only left on July 4th. She was only able to leave at that point, and she only came back because Mr. Almazan threatened to kill her. That is not consent. It's also not consent that Ms. Cook let Mr. Almazan have sex with her after a strangulation occurred. There is clear evidence of force or coercion that Mr. Almazan engaged in, and the use of strangulation for a criminal sexual conduct is a common tool that offenders use. And I'm not an expert, I can't testify to that, but I am arguing that he used that strangulation to facilitate the criminal sexual conduct. At that point, I believe there's more than probable cause evidence that there was not consent here. Consent cannot be present when fear is present. There was only one time in which she came back, and she repeatedly tried to get help from people. She ran over, tried to get help from this neighbor, Gary, or the boss, Gary. She tried to go to the neighbor's house. They were not there. She eventually called someone else that picked her up at that point, and she only went back because he made threats to kill her. That strangulation was used to facilitate the criminal sexual conduct. And in addition, the amount of force definition, in regards to force, there is a jury instruction as well that states that the amount of force can just be enough to just even embarrass someone. In this case, we have clear use of force. We have weapons, we have restraint, we have inability to leave the residence without someone's permission. And I think that it's clear from Ms. Cook's demeanor and inability to tell the story in a clear, concise manner that she was still under the influence and fear of what was happening in that house at that time. So I would ask for bind over on all of these counts.
Okay, today was the date set for the preliminary examination, and the burden is on the prosecution to establish that they have sufficient probable cause that a crime was committed, and then probable cause sufficient to charge you with those crimes. This is a burden that's not to be compared to the burden that they'd have to meet at trial, which is each element to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the burden of more than mere suspicion that those crimes were committed. We did hear testimony here today from one officer, Officer Matthew Beaton. He testified that he reported to the address of 5815 Wise Road, which is the police headquarters or operations headquarters, to meet with the alleged victim he named as Kira Cook in report of a domestic incident that had occurred. His testimony proceeded under MPL 780.27C, and at that time he testified that he met with Ms. Kara Cook, that uh, his words were that her statements were sporadic, and he was, that's indicated by the defense attorney, essentially trying to piecemeal or understand what Ms. Cook was reporting. And he perceived that to be a result of maybe some trauma. He testified that she was sniffling and was overall very emotional, that he didn't observe any injuries. And there may have been some redness, but he did not associate that with an injury. That the alleged victim testified about a 3-day period of time where she stated she was held against her will, and that the person identified as Michael Robert Almazan, with a date of birth given, and his picture confirmed in front of Officer Meaton to that alleged victim, being the person identified in court today as the defendant. She stated that he strangled her, and that the incident having occurred or started 3 days prior to the date of this report. This report date was July 6th. And so 3 days prior to that would have been July 3rd. She stated she was in a dating relationship with the defendant and that they had been living together for a few months at the area of 104 Dakin Street, City of Lansing, Ingham County, State of Michigan. And that on the 3rd of July, they got into an argument or altercation about the defendant accusing the victim of cheating, that he put his hands around her neck and pushed her down on her neck, that he was on top of her and applied pressure to her neck. She used the term choking, which, as described, would be strangulation, and that later that day, there was some interaction. The officer indicated even during the testimony that she didn't originally bring up the sexual intercourse. That was not anything she reported, but that he presumed that something else must have happened because there was a strangulation. So what happened later on? And she indicated that they did have intercourse and that the intercourse was not protected, and that that the defendant told her that the intercourse would help with her anxiety. And so he perceived that to be against her will based on the circumstances. I will note the officer did not at all testify that whether or not he asked her ever, was it against her will. He didn't testify that he asked her that. He did on a cross-examination when questioned by Mr. Cornish if she ever reported that the defendant forced her. This answer was clearly a no, that's not what she stated. There was a incident on the 4th where the victim made some contact with a coworker of the defendant. I believe it was the defendant's coworker named Gary, who showed up in a pickup truck. The defendant got upset. He shoved the victim off and he may have hit her. The officer was not clear on that portion of the testimony. The victim ran to a neighbor's house and then somehow ended up in Holt. Again, it was unclear as to how she ended up in Holt, but that while she was in Holt, she heard from someone, or according to the officer, someone else heard from someone that the defendant had threatened that he was going to kill her. And so she ends up picking him up from a Wendy's in South Lansing, and they went home. At that time, he assaulted her with, I believe, a knife to her neck. July 5th, there was some interaction with the alleged victim's grandparents. I believe they were knocking on the door. She testified, or she reported, that is, to the officer, testified that there was an assault with a carpet tool, that being 18 to 24 inches in length, and also some threats of violence against law enforcement if they were to be called. She stated that she was trying to fall asleep, that she was exhausted. She told the officers that she wasn't able to shower. And she also reported something to the effect of a lack of freedom to move around the house. She reported to the officers that there were some screws, or the defendant, I guess, must have allegedly screwed doors closed to restrict her movement around the house. She was falling asleep, and she was exhausted. He testified her eyes were rolling back into her head, or at least that's what she said, that because she was so tired, and that the defendant was rubbing her chest to wake her up. And then later that evening, another sexual intercourse took place, and that the defendant was not wearing a condom. That was again unprotected. Again, when questioned by the defense counsel on cross-examination as to if her statements was that he forced her to have intercourse, he replied, no, that was not her statement. And then on the 6th of, actually, there was at least one incident where she was released of the doors. She was let out to go to work, as to not cause any red flags to her coworkers about what was going on. And then there was another assault on the 6th with the box cutter, I believe was the tool that was allegedly used on that date. Let's see. He's charged in count 1 and count 2 with criminal sexual conduct, first degree, multiple variables, and with the theory that it was committed during the commission of a felony of unlawful imprisonment. And the people were going to strike the portion of or armed with a deadly weapon. Is that accurate?
Yes, just for the July 3rd.
Just for
sexual
July
assault.
3rd. Okay. The concern that I have here is we would recognize, if I were to go through the elements, obviously there was testimony here by the officer that there was some kind of sexual intercourse that took place. I think the concern is I need to have more than mere suspicion that a crime was committed. And the testimony of the officer was that the witness didn't even bring up anything about sexual intercourse, that he, based on his experience or assumption, assumed that because there was an assault earlier that day, that she would not have just fallen asleep, something else must have occurred. And so he questioned her about if sex had taken place, to which she said it did take place, and then he told her that it would help with her anxiety. I don't believe that we have enough evidence to support force or coercion based on that. I think it's undisputed that sex could help with some anxiety. I don't have a witness here or a victim here to provide enough information to fill in. There's a lot of gaps from this officer's testimony, because it sounds like the officer was not really able to follow the victim's testimony or statements when she was speaking to him, because in his own word, he says the victim was sporadic. And so he's trying to put it together. And then here we are months later, he's trying to now put together what he put together for the court. Don't think we have enough information to give me more than mere suspicion that a criminal sexual conduct in the first degree or at all occurred, because I don't know if it was consensual. And based on his statements, when asked if she represented to him that it was she was forced to have sex, he said no, she did not tell him that she was forced to have sex. So counts 1 and count 2 will be dismissed. Count 3, unlawful imprisonment. The testimony we have here was that he held her against her will for 3 days, and that he restricted her ability to move around the house. And that the officers was given permission to search the home with consent. Officers observed indications in the home that would support or corroborate that portion of the testimony. And so in order to prove unlawful imprisonment at trial, the people would need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. First, that the defendant knowingly restrained a person. Restrain means to forcibly restrict a person's movement or forcibly confine the person so as to interfere with that person's liberty without the person's consent or without lawful authority. The restraint does not have to exist for any particular length of time and may be related or incidental to the commission of other criminal acts. Second, the defendant did so under one or more of the following circumstances. A, the person is restrained by means of a weapon or dangerous instrument. B, the restrained person was secretly confined, which means to keep the confinement or location of the restrained person a secret. Or C, the person was restrained to facilitate the commission of another felony or to facilitate flight after commission of another felony. We have the 3rd of July being the incident in which she was strangled, and she was allegedly held and not able to leave the home to go. I believe she was going to go to work that day. There was mention of the defendant being on top of her, putting his hands around her neck after an assault, after an argument about alleged cheating. Officers did observe some screws and doors, and the testimony is that he had to, when he let her leave to go to work, that he had to remove those screws or remove something to let her out of the home. So as to the unlawful imprisonment, and she did leave, I think, on one day and return, but I would agree with the testimony or the argument of the prosecutor is that she returned because of her alleged belief that there was a threat for her to have harm or done to her, or threat that he would kill her. So that would be, for me, sufficient enough to believe that the unlawful imprisonment continued because she didn't feel like she was at liberty to stay where she was and that she needed to return to the house. I'm going to find that there is sufficient probable cause as to count 3 of unlawful imprisonment. And that she was a person who was restrained by the means of a weapon or dangerous instrument, at least on 2 of those occasions. Well, 3 of those occasions, there were 3 different tools, I think, used. And one, there was a commission of another felony, that being the assault with a weapon, and then the strangulation assault on the 3rd. Count 4, assault with intent to do great bodily harm less than strangulation, or less than murder or by strangulation. Obviously, we have testimony today from the officer that she reported being strangled by the defendant on the 3rd. And so that will be bound over with count 3. Count 5, count 6, and count 7 are all assault with a dangerous weapon, that being a felonious assault. We heard 3 different interactions during those dates in question, and where the witness reported to the officer that she was assaulted. Once was with a knife, one was with a box cutter, the other was with a metal tool. I believe it was a carpet tool that they stated was used. And the officer testified that when they searched the home, they did find the kitchen knife, the kitchen tool, some blankets, and the shorts that she allegedly wore. consistent with the alleged, or what was alleged to have happened. So counts 5, 6, and 7 will be bound over, as is the habitual offender fourth offense notice. And counts 1 and 2 are dismissed for lack of probable cause. The bind over date, September 27th. That's the date that the circuit court will get the file from this court. Your next court date will be a pretrial in circuit court. You should be made aware of that, okay?
Thank you, Your Honor.
And the bond that was set, which was $100,000 cash surety, will continue with GPS tethered and victim notification if possible. Any additional matters for the record?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor, for accommodating us.
Oh, no problem. We have one more.
Jeff has one more.
I think, I hope Bigelow brings it back up. He just left.
Safe travels,
That's
Judge.
it. Thank you. Have a good one.
Come on.
It's the best for last, huh?
Maybe.
Kelly's gonna come take over. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
My best friend in high school. On the record, in the matter, the people of the state of Michigan versus Rajay Flowers Taylor. File number is 23-02687. Council appearance.
Jeff Brodowitz on behalf of the people, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. John Abbott with the Public Defender's Office representing Mr. Flowers Taylor. He's not up here in the court today. I went down to talk to him, and the officers there advised that it was not safe for me to visit with him.
Interestingly enough, I sent my court officer down to retrieve him for today's preliminary examination, and law enforcement advised him that absolutely not, it was not safe for him to escort him to the courtroom. So have you had conversation with him?
I have, Your Honor. As early this morning, like before the 9:30 scheduled hearing time, I went down and he seemed to be okay.
Well, something has happened since then, and now my understanding is that he's been engaging in some assaultive and self-harm activity.
That's my understanding, Your Honor. Yes.
Okay, well, we could do one of two things. You've had more interaction with him than I would, and you would know what his competency would be. I can refer him for forensic, or we can reset this and you can see if maybe this is an isolated incident, since you've had communication with him before.
Right. I've spoken with him a couple of times, Your Honor, and he understands the charges and he understands the roles of the party in here in the courtroom. He remembers the incident. I had no, it's a surprise to me that he's having this kind of behavior.
Okay, so what we'll do is I'll find good cause to go beyond the 21-day timeline.
You have a slot on October 19th at 8:30.
What we said, it's October 19th, you said? At 8:30,
October 19th.
correct.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Any additional matters for today?
Nothing from the people, Your Honor.
Nothing from the defense.
Thank you, you're all set.